Hello and welcome to this presentation. I'm Tori from Canine Body Balance, and today we're going to be discussing the mechanics of prong collars. I did write an article on this and it has been seen by a huge number of people, and I'm really grateful for people sharing that information. If you haven't seen it, you can go to my website, caninebodybalance.com.au, have a look through the articles, and you will see one titled Mechanics of Prong Collars. So there's some good information in there. But today in this video, we're going to be going through and looking at how they work. There's a lot of incorrect mathematical information about prong collars. So we're going to have a look and see how they actually work. If you want, you can skip ahead to the conclusion, and I'll have all the wrap-up points for you there. Otherwise, stick with me. Okay, so here we go. Here is a prong collar, a drawing of a prong collar. Now, when we apply a force from the leash, what happens is that force gets distributed through the limited slip chain. Okay, and that causes constriction. So it would look like this. This is the same size collar, and it's just been rotated so that it constricts around the neck of the dog. So we still have the force from the leash, but we can see that the angle of the force going through the limited slip chain has changed. So that is important. All right, so let's have a look and see how this applies to the forces through each of the prongs, because that's what's important, seeing how much force is going into the dog's neck. Oh, and we can see here, if we look at the first prong link on either side, we actually have quite a long force going through. I will explain what that's all about coming up. All right. Okay, so let's have a look at prong 1. Now I want you to understand that prong links are a class 2 lever. That's going to give mechanical advantage. So let's have a look at why that is. Here's our first prong link, and this is the force that was applied to it by the connector that connected it up to the limited slip chain area. Okay, and then we've got the prong link that it connects to. And this is really important because that becomes the rotation point, or the fulcrum. Okay, so now I need to find out how much force that prong is applying to the dog's neck. First thing we need to do is pop on our axes. Now, the reason that I put it in this direction is because if we follow this line here in the opposite direction, that takes you directly through the fulcrum. So that leaves us with this component of the force causing the rotation. Okay, so now I put my force arrows on, and I've labeled the one of interest for the moment, F1x. This other force will come to be important when we're looking at the next prong link. Okay, so now I've put my angle in between F1x and F1, because that allows us to find out what the value of F1x is. Now I have just gone ahead and said, let's make it a little bit easy for these equations. I've called F1 10, the value of F1 10. That just allows us to see it as a ratio. I mean, that could be anything, but then it would you'd just factor in a ratio to increase the numbers accordingly. let's stick with imagining that we have got 10 units of force being applied to that first link via the limited slip chain. All right, so I went ahead and I measured the angle using my phone, and that gave me an angle of 65 degrees. That then means that F1x is 4.2 units of force. Now, let's find out how we can figure out how much force is being applied via this prong link to the dog's neck. We need to look at how long this link is to find out what the mechanical advantage is going to be. Okay, so T, that's my torque or my moment. That is that red curvy arrow over here, around here, that's T. Okay, so the equation that we need to use is torque equals force times the distance. Okay, I've gone ahead and said, let's make these prong links 2.5. That could be 2.5 centimeters. That seems like a fairly reasonable size. So we take that 4.2, which is your F1x, times it by 2.5, and the torque is going to be 10.5 units of torque. Okay, so now we need to measure how the distance between the fulcrum and the prong. So we've called that D prong. That's your distance there. It's because we want to figure out how much force is going through that first prong into the dog's neck. Okay, so we use the same torque equation. Torque equals force times the distance. I've gone ahead and said this distance is 3/4 of the distance of the length of the link. So if the link was 2.5, this distance between the fulcrum and the prong is 1.87. And that gives us an answer of how much force is going through that first prong into the dog's neck, 5.6. So the force that's going into the dog's neck is 5.6 units of force, and that is 1 1/3 times the amount of force in the same direction that was coming from the chain link. So you can see here that this red arrow is 1.3 times the length of this black arrow. So that's where your mechanical advantage comes in. All right, let's move on to the next prong. Okay, so if we have a look at prong 2 now, which is a little bit different to prong 1. Prong 2 is connecting to another prong, whereas prong 1 connected to the limited slip chain mechanism. So here's prong 1 up here, and then this is prong 2. So what we're going to be trying to find out is the force that this is applying to the dog's neck. Let's have a look. So this is the force F1 that was being applied to prong link number 1 via the limited slip chain mechanism. And as I said earlier, we will need to come back and look at the force that goes through the fulcrum. So if you remember, that's coming down through here. So that didn't play any part in the force that was going into the dog's neck. But this force is important for figuring out the forces in the next prong link. So let's have a look. Let's call it F2 because it's relevant to the second prong link. And we can find out the value of F2 by using our cosine equation. I measured the angle of being 25 degrees. and that gives us a force of 9 units. So F2 is 9. Then we've gone ahead and applied F2 to prong link 2 and noted where the fulcrum is on link 2. So then we need to put our axes on, and again these axes need to be 90 degrees, but this one needs to come down through, that's not a very straight line, is it? Through the fulcrum, because then that allows us to see how much torque is being created and thus how much force is going into the neck of the dog. Okay, so it was getting a little bit messy. I've popped all the information over on the right hand side of the screen for you now. This is link 2. All right, so what have we got? We want to find out what F2x dash is. Now I've called it x dash because these set of axes are in a slightly different angle to the ones that we used for prong link 1. So just differentiating the different axes that I'm using throughout these equations. Measured the angle being 60 degrees, and thus F2x dash is 4.5 units of force. So now we can use our torque equations around the fulcrum to find out what the force is going to be from prong 2 into the dog's neck. First, we need to find out the length of the link, and I've said that it was 2.5. So that gives us a total torque around the fulcrum of 11.25 units. Okay, so the prong is actually about halfway along these ones, so that is a little bit different. We use the torque equation again. We've got the torque equals the force of prong 2 times the distance between the fulcrum and the prong, and we get 6 units of force being applied into the dog's neck. But why is it at this angle? Why is it at this angle? Because the force that's being applied to the link is this one here, F2, and only this part, F2x, creates any torque because F3 was going directly through the fulcrum. So it's this part of the force here that creates the force that's going into the dog's neck. So this is what gives it its direction. So that was 1 1/3. That's the mechanical advantage because it was 6 units going into the dog's neck, and that came from only 4.5 units of force. So the mechanical advantage 1.3. Let's have a look now at the next prong, prong 3. Here we go. What have I got here? I've got prong 2 and prong 3, because as you've probably realized that the force coming from the previous prong is important. So here was force 2. There's the fulcrum of prong link 2. And this is the force that's going through the fulcrum. So this is relevant to the force that will then be applied to prong link number 3. That's why I've named it F3. I've measured the angle and it was 35 degrees. So if we use our cosine equation, we can find out that F3 is 7.3 units of force. Okay, so if we move prong link number 3 out by itself and apply F3 to the point of connection with prong link number 2, we can start to work out what force is going to be applied to the dog's neck from prong 3. First thing I've done is I've put on my axes, and again they're a different angle to the previous axes that we've already used. because it's relevant for this prong link, we need this part of the force to be going through the fulcrum down here, and that allows us to find out how much force is being applied to the neck. So let's have a look and figure that out. So F3 x double dash, the angle was 62 degrees, so that we can figure out that F3 double dash is 3.4 units of force. Then we use our torque equation to figure out the magnitude of the force being applied to the neck via prong 3. Here we go. So the torque was 8.5 units of torque, and that gives us 4.5 units of force being applied to the dog's neck on prong number 3. And that is 1.3 times the mechanical advantage, same as the previous prong. Move on now to prong number 4. So we've got prong 3 and prong 4 down here. Let's have a look and see. We applied F3. There's the fulcrum of prong link number 3. There's F4. So we know what F3 is, and then I've measured the angle, so we can figure out how much or what the magnitude of F4 is, and it's 6.6 units of force. So if I bring prong link number 4 over to the side over here, and then I apply F4 to its point of connection with prong link number 3, then we can start to figure out how much force is being applied to dog's neck on prong 4. Okay, so I added in my axes. Again, you can see the angles changed because we want this one going directly through the fulcrum, which is down here. Let's have a look. So we want to find out what F4x triple dash is. There's our force components. Measured the angle to be 50 degrees, so we use our cosine equation, and it's 4.2 units of force. So then we figure out how much torque that causes, so we can work out the force of prong. So we can figure out how much force is being applied to the dog's neck via prong link number 4. So we use our torque equation, same as we did before, and we have 10.5 units of torque around the fulcrum of prong link number 4. And then we can apply that to figure out the force coming out of prong 4 into the dog's neck. It's 5.6 units of force. So for what did we have before? We had 4.2 units of force being magnified to 5.6 units of force. And that's 1.3. The mechanical advantage is 1.3 times. So we can go ahead and look at prong number 5 now. Here we go. So we've got prong 4 and prong 5, and prong 5 is our last prong. So let's have a look and see. We've got F4, there's the fulcrum for prong link 4, there was our axes. I've measured the angle there, so we can figure out what F5 is, because that's the force that's going to be applied to prong link number 5. Okay, so it is 5.3 units of force, And here it is, prong link number 5 by itself with the force arrow attached to it and the fulcrum. Put our axes on, and we want to have a look at F5X. Is that 4 dashes? 4 dashes. That's the force that we want to figure out its value of. So I measured the angle to be 72 degrees. And we use our cosine equation. And the magnitude of that force is 1.6 units of force. So now if we put the fulcrum and our torque on the prong link number 5, we can start to figure out the force that's applied to the dog's neck via prong link number 5. So using our torque equation there, same as what we've done on the previous links, then we've got the torque being 4 units. Okay, so we're getting closer to figuring out what that force is. Using our torque equation again, and the force being applied to the dog's neck by prong link number 5 is 2.1 units of force. So mechanical advantage 1.3. Mechanical advantage, I've been saying it a lot. Because the prongs are at half the distance of the link, it gave a mechanical advantage of plus 30%. So this is all of the values for the forces for the prong links. So prong link 1 is 5.6 units of force. Prong link number 2, 6 units of force. Prong link number 3, 4.5 units of force. Prong link 4, 5.6 units of force. Prong link 5, 2.1 units of force. So that's half of the collar. So it would be mirrored on the other side. So half of the total forces, so this is one side of the prong collar, how much force is being applied to the dog's neck? 8.1 units of force. Around the whole collar, we've got 16.2 units of force being applied to the dog's neck. So there it is, there's the prong collar. So we're looking at the constriction of the collar around the dog's neck, and that's giving us that mechanical advantage once we're pulling up on the leash here. So what have we got here? We've got so this is prong link number 1. So if we go back to prong link number 1, so then we can figure out how much force the handler needed to apply to create this much force in the dog's neck. So force number 1, that was the force that was applied to prong link number 1. The angle is going to be 70 degrees. That's what I've measured, because we are assuming that the force is being applied in a vertical direction. So that's why our axes are horizontal and vertical. So we can work out how much force the handler needs to apply. So that was 3.4 units of force. However, that's only half of the collar. So the handler would apply 6.8 units of force to gain a mechanical advantage of 2.4. 6.8 units of force. So imagine a water bottle, a 600 ml water bottle filled with water. That's about that much force. So if you applied that much force to the leash and then what would happen is you have magnified that to 2 and almost a half of those water bottles. That's how much force the dog is feeling around their neck. Now this is just static constriction only. So that's just the collar constricting around the neck. This isn't with enough force to move the dog. So let's have a look now at pressure, because a lot of people talk about pressure when they talk about prong collars. So what is pressure? Pressure is force times the contact area. Now we know that the contact area of a prong collar is very small. We are looking at contact area being point force at each of those prongs. There's 10 of them. So the pressure is how much force is applied in that point load. So if we go back thinking about the water bottles, if you laid a water bottle flat on your hand, it would feel different to if you had that water bottle with a piece of Lego underneath. As you decrease the amount of surface area that's in contact, the pressure increases because the force has stayed the same. So here we go. These are all the point force parts. Now I've gone ahead and I've put all the values that were calculated previously on a chart so you can see. And what does this chart mean? Prong number 1 over here. Prong number 2 over here. Prong number 3. Prong number 4. Prong number 5. And then mirror it again on the other side. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, what we can see is that the value of each of those bars is different. So the force applied to the dog's neck at each prong is not equal. But what do we see between these bars? We see white space. That is zero force. Okay? So the pressure is not constant. If the pressure was constant, it would look like this. I'll try and do it as straight as possible. It would look like this. This would be constant pressure, but it is not. All this area here is zero pressure. Zero pressure. Zero pressure. Okay? And then this pressure is going to be whatever the force is, and that's about 5.6, times the surface area. So the surface area is pretty small. So is pressure constant around the dog's neck? Absolutely not. Is the force constant in each of the prong links? No, it's not. Let's get rid of that. And we'll have a look at, very briefly, dynamic movement. So let's take a look at dynamic movement. Dynamic movement is when not only has constriction occurred, but the dog is moved because of the force that's applied to the leash and the collar. The equation that's relevant for that is force equals mass times acceleration. So if the dog is stationary and then they are moved abruptly, then it's a high acceleration. So the force is quite high. If the acceleration is lower, then the force is also lower. Okay, so we've got the leash pulling on the collar, which pulled the dog onto the screen. So if we have a look, we can see that that actually creates some force on these two prong links at the bottom here, because the force is going in this direction. So we have to balance it out by having force going into the dog's neck. So this is probably, it's probably why it's good that when we calculated the static constriction force, that it was actually a lower force in these two end prongs here, prong 5, because then once you start to add in the dynamic movement, you do get an increase of the force there. But that's only if the leash is being pulled in this direction. I mean, obviously the leash can be pulled in off to the side or in any other direction, and that's going to create different forces within the collar. But yes, so I'm not going to go ahead and calculate that. It's not really that relevant to what we're talking about here, other than just understanding that as soon as the dog's neck moves, the forces do increase on the prongs that are pointing in the same direction. All right, let's move on. So to sum it up, do prong collars apply even pressure around? Do prong collars apply even pressure around the neck? No, they don't. I've shown you that mathematically, and that should be fairly well understood, because the prong is only attached to small section of the neck. All that bit of the neck that the collar's not touching, there's no contact area, there's no pressure. Okay, so for pressure to be applied evenly, it would have to be a touching. It would have to be touching the neck all the way around. Do prong collars apply an even amount of force through each prong? No, they don't. Mathematically, we've been through that in these slides. No, they don't. So prong collars do not apply even pressure around the neck. Prong collars do not apply an even amount of force through each prong. What they do is they provide a mechanical advantage to the handler. That is because the prongs are using a small surface area to contact the neck. So that's a point force application. So what we're doing is we're concentrating the force that could be spread out over a wider area. We're concentrating that to a small area of each of those prongs. The other reason that you get a mechanical advantage from using a prong collar is because it is a class 2 lever, and it's rotating around the fulcrum, and the prong the prong that's poking into the neck, you have got a larger force due to the torque that's created from the turning. I hope that answered some questions. I would love to hear your feedback. Please write some comments for me if you think I've made any mistakes, or if you'd like to give feedback or ask questions, go ahead and write a comment. This has been just a theoretical mathematical example, but it demonstrates that the common misconception that prong collars apply even pressure around the neck is absolutely false. We can't even say that they apply even amount of force through each prong. It's false. So there we go. That is the mathematics involved with figuring out how much force a prong collar applies to a dog's neck. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Thank you for joining me today. If you haven't already, head on over to my website and check out some of the articles there. As I mentioned earlier, we do have an article on mechanics of prong collars, and that probably needs updating a little bit. That's okay. If you find something that you feel needs updating, just let me know, and we'll attend to that. All right. Have a great day.